Charles Dickens, the well-known Victorian novelist. When we talk of the Victorian age, as we've done in some earlier episodes, we think of Queen Victoria, who ruled on and on for almost or more than half a century. It was a period of great writing. We think of novelists and we think of essayists and of course poets too. What names come to mind? Charles Dickens? Yes. And then Tennyson and Browning and Arnold and Carlyle and Ruskin. Oh my God, so many names. An age of prosperity, an age of development, but also an age where science and religion seem to come into conflict. It is the Victorian age where we had this great novelist, Charles Dickens. Oh my God, are you asking me, isn't this an episode on poetry? Well, yes, more about that very soon. The poet Charles Dickens lived from 1812 to 1870. Known for his novels like David Copperfield, Oliver Twist, A Tale of Two Cities, Pickwick Papers, The Old Curiosity Shop, and so on. Let me begin with a little anecdote to tell us how popular he was. Remember, we are looking at the 19th century, where England and the US were naturally miles apart because you had to travel by ship. The aeroplane had not yet been invented. So I love the story that these books that he wrote, were serialized in some magazines maybe, and the magazines came by ship. So when the Old Curiosity Shop was, I believe, nearing its end, and the ship landed, there was a crowd of people on this American shore. And they were all chanting, "Is Nellie dead? Is Nellie dead?" Because in the previous episode, she was to die and maybe she would be saved. I'm just saying this to show you how popular Charles Dickens was. But to come back to his life, his father was in the debtor's prison. That again is something new to us. To most of us at least, because in those days, if you couldn't repay your debt, you were sent to prison. So very young, Charles Dickens had to go to work. He really suffered as a young boy, working in those days when there were no rules against child labor. You may remember that in novels like David Copperfield, we do have instances of young boys being sent to work. But then I'm talking about a poem. And this poem, The Ivy Green, comes in a novel called The Pickwick Papers. Oh, that's another story. You must read that book. Slightly longish for most of us today, but a book worth reading. So The Ivy Green, which appears in The Pickwick Papers, is what we are looking at today. The ivy green. Some of us may know that the plant ivy is green, and therefore it was even used as a crown to celebrate victory in games, etc. But here we are looking at the ivy green in a very, very different way. And I would love to begin by reading the poem, at least a part of the poem. Oh, a dainty plant is the ivy green, that creepeth o'er ruins old. Of right choice food are his meals, I ween, in his cell so lone and cold. The wall must be crumbled, the stones decayed, to pleasure his dainty whim. And the mouldering dust that years have made is a merry meal for him. Creeping where no life is seen, a rare old plant is the ivy green. Can you see the contrast that he's talking about? The ivy plant is dainty, but where does it grow? In the ruins. There is a total contrast for us of this beautiful green plant which grows among the mouldering old trees. The rocks may be, the caves may be, and therefore the contrast is very, very visible. In the decay and ruins is this survivor, the ivy plant. And he creeps and he goes about. He doesn't grow. Look at the word that the poet uses. He creeps. That means he goes where he pleases. And it is indeed a rare plant. This ivy green. Why rare? Because it is growing in a place where you really wouldn't expect it to be. And then he goes on. Fast he stealeth on, though he wears a staunch old heart has he. How closely he twineth to his friend, the huge oak tree. I want you to get that impression in your mind's eye. Here is the ivy green. It's a creeper. And what is it doing? Growing on the oak tree, almost like a parasite. But yet he calls it the oak tree as his friend. As he joyously hugs and crawleth around the rich mold of dead men's graves, creeping where grim death has been, a rare old plant is the ivory green. Unless we have imagination, in fact, as much imagination as the poet had when he wrote this poem, we won't be able to appreciate. But just look around you in any garden, and I'm sure you'll see these creepers. And how are creepers different? Creepers are different because, remember, they don't grow up straight. They grow as they please. And therefore here, there is this theme of endless time. And it goes on. Whole ages have fled and their works decayed, and nations have scattered been. But the stout old ivy shall never fade from its hale and hearty green. In this poem, there's something about life continuing, about nature being forever. And other poets have talked about it, if you remember Keats on the Grecian urn. So nature's endurance is in contrast to time and mortality of human beings. It can decay, it can live in decaying ruins, but it never decay. So you have stanza 1 describing the dainty creeper, and then the poem ending on the resilience of the ivy. The poem has throughout a mood gloomy. Why gloomy? Because death seems to be prevalent all through the poem. It's a 3-stanza poem of 10 lines each, with a very, very simple rhyme scheme. A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, and then the couplet E, E. There are figures of speech, but I want to begin by talking about personification. The ivy, which is a plant, is seen throughout as if it's a human being. Look at the number of lines where this personification comes across. When he talks about the hale and hearty green, see the personification, giving it a human quality. And then you have a paradox. When he talks about dainty, right? He says dainty but rugged. The paradox of something being dainty, and then because the oak tree comes, you have the rugged. There are metaphors when he talks about the stately building. The oak tree is compared to a stately building. Need I remind you that a metaphor does not use words as like and as. So it is these figures of speech that run through the poem, and therefore, when I give you one example, I don't want you to imagine that that is the only place where you have a metaphor or you have a paradox. A seemingly simple poem, but yet with so many figures of speech. As I look at some of the earlier episodes, I keep wondering, have I brought in enough variety to show you the greatness of English poetry? Sorry, I shouldn't be saying English poetry because I have brought in poems in translation too. So, well, here is a poem which is in a novel. That itself is interesting. Like today, we talk about standalone shops. So, do we have standalone poems? Yes, most of our poems are, but not this poem. And then there is something about the poem which struck me as being so important, as being universal, the constant obsession. Is it obsession? But yes, our being interested in this whole idea of death and mortality. We live, we want to live, but at the end of it all is this death. So that was another thing. And then I asked myself, can great novelists be great poets too? Rarely, but sure, there are many examples. I put all these together and I said, wow, here is a poem which I think I do love, and I hope my listeners and readers and viewers too. Would you agree with that?